Hello, and welcome to Team Counterculture. Today we're going to be ranking every movie by the stop-motion film company, Laika. I'm Pat Sajak, and this is Sarah Palin, Michelle Bachmann, Laura Ingraham, Ann Coulter, Megan Kelly, Marjorie Green, Lauren Boebert, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Pressley, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush, Paris Hilton, Alex Trebek, Vanna White, Ken Jennings, James Holzhauer, Brad Rutter, Anne Frank, Mindy McCready, Greta Thunberg, Ponyboy Curtis, Soda Pop Curtis, Derry Curtis, Steve Randall, Two-Bit Matthews, Dally Winston, Johnny Cade, Phileas Fogg, Megan Phelps Roper, Ellen Ripley, Jeanette McCurdy, Miranda Cosgrove, and Archie Bunker. Normally I'd stop there, but today we're joined by two new Team Counterculture members, those being the two Laika characters, Lionel Frost from Missing Link and Archibald Snatcher from The Box Trolls. The rules for this ranking are simple, one in the S tier and a maximum of 2 in the other tiers. Now that we've got those introductions out of the way, let's talk about Laika. Laika released its first film in 2009, that being the spooky kids movie Coraline. This one is directed by the same guy who gave us The Nightmare Before Christmas, one of my favorite movies of all time. What do you guys think of this one?
S tier?
B tier.
A tier.
S tier.
A tier.
A tier.
S tier.
A tier.
A tier.
S tier.
I tier.
A tier.
A tier.
A tier.
S tier.
S tier.
S tier.
A tier. B tier.
S tier.
B tier.
S 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 tier.
A tier.
S tier.
S tier.
S tier.
A tier. A tier.
S tier. A tier.
A tier.
A tier.
Okay, so for Coraline, we've got 19 S tiers, 16 A tiers, and 3 B tiers. No C's or D's, which I kind of anticipated. That means half of us put it in the S tier. Wow. The only way it's not staying there is if everyone who didn't put it in S tier all pick the same movie, which I doubt will happen. Now, would any of you like to explain why they put it where you did?
I just love the animation on this one. The animation is great on all of these, don't get me wrong, but I feel like Laika never topped the scenes where our villain tries to lure Coraline in with wonderful things. I also feel like Coraline is both a normal preteen and a total badass at the same time, which is a tough line to walk, but this movie does it well. I also think this has the most unique message of any of these films.
Hell yeah. I fucking love Coraline as a character. She's as much of a little wise-ass as I am. Also, the animation is amazing, yet fucking scary at the same time. What's not to love?
What Mindy said.
Can I just chime in and say real quick that this movie probably would have been my S tier if its message didn't make me feel personally attacked? Seriously, if I was in Coraline's place, I probably would have ended up stuck in that world forever. Especially when I was lying to myself about whether or not Derry cared about me. That's why it only ended up in second place for me.
I actually did put it as my S tier, and I agree 100% with what you said about feeling personally attacked by the message, Ponyboy. If I was Coraline's age and something like that happened to me, I would totally have stayed with the other mother. That said, it resonated with me emotionally in large part because of that. It also looks gorgeous, but for me that's just an added bonus.
Glad I'm not the only one.
I'm sure a lot of Laika fans would agree that this is S tier. I, on the other hand, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed this movie a lot, but there were points when I felt like it was focusing too much on showing off the unique animation instead of the plot. It just felt a bit too much like Laika was showing off. The plot we did get was fucking amazing, and the animation did admittedly look nice, but I wish Laika would stop rubbing it in our faces. Still, it's a great movie with a fantastic cast of characters and some good humor to balance out the creepy moments.
I kind of agree with you about the trying too hard to look pretty thing, Soda Pop. That said, I liked the message, I liked the villain, and I liked the animation, even if it was a bit overdone. Also, could someone please explain why the beldam gets a tougher hero than I do? What do you take me for, Laika? Anyway, this movie was great, and it made me wish I could do magic.
Trying too hard to look pretty? You guys just can't appreciate the importance of atmosphere. Not every movie needs to be all action all the time. Anyway, this movie is beautifully animated, the plot is unique,
and I'll be damned if Coraline isn't a little badass. Everything about it is great.
I'm not against movies showing off their scenery. I just think this movie overdid it a bit. That's all.
Well, you're certainly entitled to your wrong opinion, but I'd rather watch a movie that's nice to look at instead of a bunch of fight scenes.
Hey, be nice to the new guy. Anyway, I'm the Laika fanboy here, and I agree with Paris. Everything about Coraline is great. It's the perfect creepy kids movie, right up there with The Nightmare Before Christmas. The animation is perfect. Anyone else?
This is one of 2 tins for me out of all these. I really enjoyed this one. I like that it feels both grounded yet utterly bizarre at the same time. On one hand, Coraline feels like a real preteen and the message is about not dwelling on fantasies. But on the other hand, there are so many fantastical elements in this film. It's amazing, but not quite my S tier.
The visuals are great, the plot is interesting, and Coraline, while a bit bratty, at least feels like a real preteen girl. If it wasn't for certain biases, this might be an S tier. It's still fantastic, though.
Okay, anyone else? All right, so after Coraline, Laika would release their second movie in 2012 titled Paranorman. This took the darkness of Coraline even further and is basically a children's horror movie. What do we think of this one?
B tier.
A tier.
A tier.
B tier.
B tier.
S tier.
C tier.
A tier. B tier.
B tier.
I tier.
S tier.
A tier.
B tier.
A tier.
B tier.
A tier.
C tier.
A tier.
B tier.
A tier.
B tier.
C tier.
A tier.
B tier.
B tier.
B tier.
B tier.
C tier.
B tier.
A tier.
A tier.
B tier.
S tier.
C tier.
B tier.
B tier.
C tier.
Okay, so that's 3 S tiers, 12 A tiers, 17 B tiers, and 6 C tiers. We're a bit more divided on this one. Still, it's going in the B tier, at least for now. Now let's explain why we gave it what we did.
I just love the gritty atmosphere, the beautiful animation, and the fact that this felt like a real horror movie, even though it's a kid's film. Also, I think the message of not letting other people's mistreatment of you turn you into a bad person is a good one. More people should watch this, including my past self.
This is my least favorite of these Laika films, and I'm still putting it in the B tier. That's a testament to how much I love Laika. Anyway, if it wasn't for the annoying characters, this would probably be a much closer race. As it is, it's still pretty damn close considering I like everything else about this movie.
I enjoyed some aspects of it, such as the message and the animation. Unfortunately, the character designs were hideous, the humor sucked, and the characters were almost all assholes. It has enough good aspects to barely keep it out of the D tier, but barely.
Duh, it's a horror movie. Hideous character designs and asshole characters are kind of the point.
I think Ellen Ripley would like a word with you.
Touché. Anyway, what did you think of this movie, Ellen?
I'm kind of between you two in terms of how I feel about this one. It's a great movie, though the humor felt a bit immature. Also, the characters fucking sucked. Other than that, I loved the animation and that final act kicked ass.
I love this movie, and if I wasn't completely and utterly biased, it might be my S tier. The animation is beautiful, yet gritty. I loved the antagonist. The fight scene with the zombies was full of action-packed tension, and the whole thing was just incredible. Again, this is borderline S tier.
For me, this is in the B tier, but it's still a 9 out of 10. I really enjoyed the message of this one, and as a former Westboro Baptist, the whole thing with the zombie judge made me feel called out in a good way. It has a great message and great animation to boot.
So I guess it was your turn to feel called out?
Yeah. What did you think, Pony Boy?
I like it, but compared to my top 3, it feels a bit less ambitious. I like the message, the animation is good, but man did the characters annoy me. Also, as beautiful as the animation is, I'd take any of the other movies we're talking about over it in that department.
I love the main character in this movie, and I love the children's horror vibe. Unfortunately, I couldn't stand any of the other characters, and I hate that they got off totally free of consequences. So yeah, good movie, but it's flawed.
For me, this is C tier, mostly because it disappointed me. I wanted to love this. The animation is incredible. The character designs look great. I like the idea behind it. But then over half of the movie is dedicated to making bad jokes and our main character being treated like shit by everyone else, who, like Greta said, get no consequences for their actions. Yes, this was disappointing.
I kind of agree. Don't get me wrong, it's good, and the last part is every bit as brilliant as you guys are saying. However, I'm really not a fan of the characters and the humor is annoying. I didn't hate it, but if I'm in a Laika mood, this is the last one I'd want to watch.
I feel like Archie needs someone to back him up, so I'll say my piece. I love children's horror media, especially ones that stay true to the horror formula. I especially love all the classic horror references. The humor was great, the animation, of course, was great, and damn, that final act was powerful.
Thanks, James.
No problem.
Anyone else? Okay, let's move on. Anyway, after the success of Paranorman, Laika released another film 2 years later in 2014 called The Box Trolls. This one takes on class struggle and prejudice. I think I know where at least one of us is going to put this one. What do you guys think?
A tier.
A tier.
S tier.
B tier.
S tier.
AA tier.
B tier.
S tier. S tier.
A tier.
S tier.
A tier.
S tier.
A tier.
A tier.
A tier.
B tier.
A tier.
A tier.
A tier. A tier.
I tier.
B tier.
A tier.
A tier. A tier.
A tier. A tier.
A tier.
AA tier.
A tier.
AA tier.
B tier.
A tier.
A tier.
A tier.
S tier.
B tier.
Okay, so that's 7 S tiers, 25 A tiers, and 6 B tiers. A tier wins by a landslide. Now let's do some explaining, shall we?
I'll go first, since this is my movie. Anyway, I'll show that I still have a bit of narcissism in me by making this my S tier. I love that they made me look as evil as possible, because their version of me was. I've come to agree with the message of this film too. Also, if Eggs, Winnie, or any of the box trolls are watching this, just know that I'm sorry. As for Lord Portly Rind, he's a cunt, and I don't want to be a part of his club anymore.
I really enjoyed this. It was so action-packed and fun while having a great and surprisingly dark message. It's a 10 for me, but something else beat it out. Also, Archibald, props for getting yourself out of that toxic mindset.
Until I actually met Archibald Snatcher, this was my least favorite because the villain shares a name with me. I said to myself, he's not even a cool villain. Now that I've met him, not only is he a cool villain, he's a cool person in general. Also, the message is great, the animation is perfect, etc., big words, chummy banter.
Thank you, Soda Pop and Archie. Wait, did you just quote me, Archie?
Yes.
You're bloody amazing, you know that?
Yeah, thanks.
The character designs aren't as cool as the ones in, say, Coraline. And I also feel like it was a bit white savior-ish to have a human teach the box trolls courage. Still, props for trying to make a kids' movie that might as well be about the Holocaust. That's pretty impressive.
I just love the ambition behind this movie. It has a pretty dark message, and I like that it doesn't insult kids' intelligence. Also, Archibald Snatcher is vicious and the box trolls are adorable.
I loved the steampunk influence, I loved the plot and the message, and of course the villain was amazing. I'm not going to review this movie without praising Archibald.
This was pretty damn close to being my S tier, but Coraline was just so beautiful that I had to put it there. Still, this is a 10 out of 10 movie for me. Also, props to Archibald Snatcher for being here today and for becoming less of a jerk than he was in the movie.
Great allegory to what I went through, even if some things were horribly inaccurate. I could have done without the human savior thing, for example. Still, this is a great movie.
I really liked the steampunk feel of this one. It also has a perfect message that I'm glad Archibald has finally learned. Oh, and the characters are great too, of course.
This movie is just perfect. The box trolls are adorable, Archibald is an entertaining villain, and the critiques of the government are on point. Seriously, fuck Lord Portly Rind.
Yes, Lauren, fuck Lord Portly Rind. Say it louder for the people in the back.
Lord Portly Rind is a cunt.
Fuck yeah.
Does anyone else have something they'd like to say before things get even more out of hand?
I enjoyed the villain, and while I was uncertain about the box trolls at first, I have to admit they're adorable. They're like the Minions except a lot cooler. The animation looks great, and oh my god, the message of this thing is a gut punch.
Thank you, Ellen. Anyway, this movie is great. It's a brutal watch with great animation, and I loved Archibald Snatcher as a villain even before I met him in person. He's just so twisted yet hilarious at the same time. Anyway, does anyone else want to go? No? Okay, let's move on to the next movie. 2 years after the Box Trolls, Laika released Kubo and the Two Strings in 2016. This one is extremely ambitious and more in the style of Coraline. What do we think of it?
A tier. B tier.
C tier.
A tier.
A tier.
B tier.
A tier.
B tier.
A tier.
A tier.
B tier.
B tier.
B tier.
S tier.
B tier.
A tier.
A tier.
S tier.
B tier.
A tier.
S tier.
I tier.
A tier.
B tier.
A tier.
A tier.
A tier.
A tier.
B tier.
A tier.
B tier.
B tier.
S tier.
B tier.
A tier.
B tier.
B tier.
A tier.
Okay, so that's 4 S tiers, 18 A tiers, 15 B tiers, and 1 C tier. That puts it in the A tier along with the Box Trolls. So far, we haven't had to move anything around, but if Missing Link ends up in the A tier, we still might. Anyway, would anyone like to give some explanation for Kubo and the Two Strings?
Not as gritty as the Box Trolls or Paranorman, or as beautiful as Coraline. Still great, though, if only for the adventurous plot and great dynamics between the characters.
This is my second favorite next to Coraline. The animation and atmosphere of this thing is just perfect, and how can I not love Kubo as a character? He's funny, brave, and just perfect.
I just love this movie. It's every bit as beautiful as Coraline, maybe even a bit more ambitious. And if Coraline wasn't such a masterpiece, this would be in the S tier.
I love this movie, but it's not as gritty as Paranorman or the Box Trolls, nor does it have as good of a message as Coraline. I still thought it was a beautifully dark movie, though.
I need to read up on Japanese mythology if it has shit like this in it. There were so many cool visuals and interesting things in this movie. The plot might be a bit generic, but I'll be damned if the rest of it doesn't make up for it.
It was beautiful to look at, and I liked the adventurous plot and the dynamics between our characters. Like Coraline, though, I felt it was trying a bit too hard to be unique. Still great, though.
I love this movie. It has the biggest sense of adventure, and the characters kick ass. 10 out of 10.
Anyone else? Okay, I'll go now. I love the scary imagery, and while I think the last 3 movies did it better, I still think this movie is absolutely beautiful. Anyway, let's move on to the final Laika movie as of right now, Missing Link, released in 2019. What do we think of this one?
B tier. S tier.
B tier.
A tier.
C tier.
B tier.
A tier.
B tier.
C tier.
B tier.
B tier.
B tier.
B tier.
B tier.
C tier.
B tier.
B tier.
B tier.
S tier.
B tier.
B tier.
B tier.
A tier.
B tier.
B tier.
B tier.
B tier.
B tier.
S tier.
B tier.
B tier.
C tier.
A tier.
C tier.
B tier.
S tier.
C tier.
S tier.
Okay, so that's 5 S tiers, 4 A tiers, 23 B tiers, and 6 C tiers. That puts it in the B tier, which means we won't have to move anything around. Now, let's do some explaining for this one.
For me, it was interesting to watch myself grow. Bloody hell, I used to be an awful human being. Laika portrays me and my friendships with Susan and Adelina extraordinarily well, and they captured the beauty of our adventure perfectly.
This was the most fun, action-packed, and exciting movie they've done yet. It's beautiful to look at, too. The more light-hearted tone of this one made it my favorite. Also, the Sasquatch character is hilarious.
Sorry, Lionel. I love you and all, but this movie could have done well with some higher stakes. I enjoyed the characters, and the action scenes were great, but the plot fell a bit flat for me. Still, it was nice to see what I would look like as the good guy.
Oh my god, this movie was adorable! Don't get me wrong, I like the other movies too, but man, was it nice to get a reprieve from all that darkness. The characters were all really cool, And Lionel probably would have stolen the show if it wasn't for the adorable Sasquatch named Susan.
Thanks a lot, Miranda. I've always wanted to lose to a Sasquatch.
You're welcome.
I kind of agree with Archibald. I thought this movie had little to no stakes, which dragged it down a fair bit. It was good for what it was, and I loved the animation. Unfortunately, it didn't connect much with me beyond that.
It was a fun, wholesome little adventure. Some of the humor was a bit juvenile, though it never insulted the kids' intelligence, thankfully. The animation and the characters were great, though.
How has no one mentioned the similarities to Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne yet? This movie has essentially the same plot, except it has a Sasquatch instead of Passepartout and an assassin instead of a detective. As the main character from Around the World in 80 Days, this movie put a smile on my face.
Thank you, Phileas.
You're very welcome, Lionel.
Good points, all of you. Anyway, this is what our final tier list looks like. Don't forget to do all that YouTube algorithm stuff. I'm Pat Sajak. These guys are Sarah Palin, Michelle Bachmann, Laura Ingraham, Ann Coulter, Megan Kelly, Marjorie Green, Lauren Boebert, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Presley, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Jamal Bowman, Corey Bush, Paris Hilton, Alex Trebek, Vanna White, Ken Jennings, James Holzhauer, Brad Rutter, Anne Frank, Mindy McCready, Greta Thunberg, Ponyboy Curtis, Soda Pop Curtis, Derry Curtis, Steve Randall, Two-Bit Matthews, Dally Winston, Johnny Cade, Phileas Fogg, Megan Phelps Roper, Ellen Ripley, Jeanette McCurdy, Miranda Cosgrove, Archie Bunker, Lionel Frost, and Archibald Snatcher, and this is Team Counterculture signing off.